This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
All right, Patrick, you ready to dance with some shadow men?
I'm ready. Chapter 38, Maidens of the Spear, and our symbol is the snake and the wheel.
I feel like we've been getting that a lot lately.
A lot of significant events, I feel like.
I suppose. But it also feels like, well, we don't really have a good icon to throw in here. Throw in the snake and the wheel.
That works. It could have been like Aiel, Shield and Spear, or...
Right, there's so many other options for this chapter. You've got the Aiel, you've got women channelers, you've got healing.
Yeah.
They're by a river.
These are really important events, though, and I don't really feel like going back right now. But so recently we had the chapter with Perrin releasing Gaul from the cage. And he says, oh, well, you know, if you're looking for he who comes with the dawn, you're going the wrong way, Gaul. You should head to Tyr, and that's where I'm going. And Gaul's like, okay, see you there. And in this chapter, almost the exact same thing. Well, I shouldn't say the exact same thing, but...
There's a fulfillment of a prophecy rather than someone just saying, oh, this is where you need to go.
Yeah.
So I think the Aiel in this chapter figure out where Rand is based on a specific prophecy, which I'll talk about when we get there.
Sure. What I was saying, something really similar happens, at least in that the Supergirls meet up with Ruark, Bane, Chiad, Avienda, and a group of Aiel, and who then end up learning that these three important women are heading to Tyr. And Nynaeve says it's because they're chasing dark friends.
Right.
Which, right, we'll get to this in a second. And so the Aiel turn south rather than continuing on west past the Dragon Wall.
It's like 25 Aiel total.
Right.
And
so we
then
have this,
some of them die, so it ends up being like 19.
Yeah. Convergence of important characters all heading to the same place.
Totally.
Where Rand is heading to.
And it's all orchestrated by the Forsaken.
Yeah.
That, you know, the reason Rand is heading there is because of the dreams Bilal is sending his way, and the manipulation of Lanfear gets the girls headed that way.
Totally.
And that's all... Why is Matt heading there?
Why does Matt end up heading to Tyr?
Because he's trying to help the girls. He overhears the conversation where they're going to be assassinated.
That's right.
And so, because he goes into Andor, overhears that to deliver the letter, overhears Ravine talking about killing Elaine.
And we know there's a price on their heads when these
Absolutely.
Myrddraal show up. Who knows if they were actually going to pay or not, but these men somehow knew that they could sell these women to a Myrddraal who says, yes, these were the three that I sought.
I assume some of these people are, a fair number of these bandits are dark friends.
Could be.
At least a few of them are.
Evil one way or another.
Right.
Anyway, I should do the read-in before we just talk about the whole chapter.
It's such a good chapter.
I know. Egwene embraced Saidar before the scream was well out of her mouth. Sorry, I'm just going to start that over. I just had a deja vu, and I was like, wait, did we do this chapter already? But we haven't. I've just read this chapter like 4 times in the last week. So.
Right.
Egwene embraced Saidar before the scream was well out of her mouth, and she saw the glow around Elaine, too. For an instant, she wondered if Elisor had heard their screams and would send help. The blue crane could not be more than a mile upriver. Then, she was dismissing the need for help, already weaving flows of air and fire into lightning. She could almost still hear their yelling. Nynaeve was simply standing there with her arms crossed beneath her breasts, and a firm expression on her face. But Egwene was not sure whether that was because she was not angry enough to touch the true source, or because she had already seen what Egwene was just now seeing. The person facing them was a woman no older than Egwene herself, if somewhat taller. She did not let go of Saidar. Men were sometimes silly enough to think a woman was harmless merely because she was a woman. Egwene had no such illusions. In a corner of her mind, she noted that Elaine was no longer surrounded by the glow. The daughter heir must still harbor such foolish notions. She was never a Shan-Chan prisoner, Egwene thinks.
So I think of Nynaeve simply wasn't angry, so she couldn't have embraced the source.
Probably.
Because they're just walking along having a normal conversation. Surprise doesn't make her angry. She has to work her way up to being angry.
Yeah. Which she does. We see her do in the next chapter.
Yes. And I've noticed how being a Shan Chan prisoner has hardened Egwene quite a bit.
And maybe set her on edge a little bit, too. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
She's on her guard more than the others seem to be.
She may be suffering from some stress, trauma after imprisonment. You might call it some post-traumatic stress disorder.
We've talked about this. Like that. We've talked about this in relation to Egwene, but also Rand and Perrin seem to show significant signs of PTSD.
I mean, they are in a war. They are fighting for their lives. They are under constant threat. They are being hunted. Them in particular.
Yeah.
You know, that constant awareness will wear you down over time. Unless you're Lan, in which case he just learns how to be alert in his sleep and rolls with it.
And I mean, Matt shows some signs, but he seems almost more like...
Well, I mean, he can depend on his luck, and I think that gives him a sense of freedom that the other people don't have.
Yeah.
Is that he can just be like, well, I'm lucky, you know? I just don't worry too much and take things randomly, and luck takes care of the rest.
That's true. And he's also kind of, admittedly, I think a bit of a comic relief character throughout the series.
Sure. I'd also say he's very self-deceptive, and that he's able to lie to himself and not really suffer the effects, not really exhibit signs of suffering effects
as severely.
Yeah. He compartmentalizes better, I think.
He tends not to be a dire character. Matt is like, well, how do I approach this situation without getting a hole poked through me? Whereas Rand is like, I accept that the only way to approach this situation is to get holes poked through me. And Perrin's like, I'd rather morally not want to consider this question at all.
How do I not deal with the issue of getting holes poked in me?
Right. I'll read this little part that I had outlined as well. Egwene did not think many men would be stupid enough to think the woman in front of them was not dangerous, even though her hands were empty, and she wore no visible weapons. Blue-green eyes and reddish hair cut short, except for a narrow tail that hung to her shoulders, soft, laced knee boots, and close-fitting coat and breeches, all in the same shades of earth and rock. Such coloring and clothing had been described to her once. This woman was Aiel. She also has the thought, she looks like Rand's cousin.
Yeah, basically.
Well, if you've only met like 2 tall redheads in your entire life, then sure. And she also seems to know that the Maidens of the Spear are no less deadly than their male counterparts.
Oh, sure.
Of the other warrior societies.
Did you notice that Egwene felt a sudden odd affinity for the woman?
I did, but I assumed that's because she looks so much like Rand?
It's because she can channel. She senses the ability to channel in her.
You think so?
Absolutely. That's what that affinity is.
Everyone in Discord is agreeing. So.
Yeah.
Seconded.
It's like fifth.
And thirded, yeah.
But yeah, that's absolutely... And she goes on to realize what that is a little bit later around the Wise Ones and I believe Moraine. But that's like in Shadow Rising.
Right. We see it alluded to in this chapter, but then nobody says it outright.
But she's able to feel that same affinity for 2 out of the 4 Dreamwalkers, and those are the ones who can channel. And that's when she realizes, oh, some of them can channel and some of them can't. Oh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what this affinity is.
Oh, cool. My name is Avienda, the Aiel woman said, of the 9 Valley Sept of the Tarat Aiel. Her face was as flat and expressionless as her voice. I am Fardaris Mai, a maiden of the spear. She paused a moment, studying them. You have not the look in your faces, but we saw the rings. In your lands, you have women much like our wise ones, the women called Aes Sedai. Are you women of the White Tower? Or not? For a moment, Egwene did feel unease. We? She looked around them carefully, but saw no one behind any bush within 20 paces. Of course, Bane and Chiat are like 10 feet away or something.
Well, yeah, they're just right there.
Yeah.
Hiding in a, as they say frequently, hiding in a ditch that no one thought could hide a dog.
Right.
And I say with timber, it's because the tail would be wagging up above the ditch. Look over, whap, 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 whap. And they know enough about Aes Sedai to know they have an ageless look in their face.
Right.
But not all Aes Sedai have that look.
And Avienda asks a vaguely worded enough question that in a moment here, Nynaeve says, "We are women of the White Tower," Nynaeve said calmly, and that is not a lie.
That's true. They are.
They are women of the White Tower.
Yes.
They're
just
not Aes Sedai.
Although they definitely lie about that straight out many times.
Yeah?
I mean, whenever they say, "I am Egwene Alvear of the Green Ajah,"
Oh, well.
Aes Sedai, like, that's a lie, it's...
Sure. Does Nynaeve do that? We've been keeping our eye out for the times that she lies, which are few and far between still.
Sure.
And it is generally when they do, I think, to save their own skins.
I think they talk about it like when they're with the Seanchan, or not the Seanchan, the Sea Folk. There's a few other times when all three girls go undercover as full Aes Sedai and lie about it pretty straight out.
"We are women of the White Tower," Nynaeve said calmly. She was very obvious in not looking around for other Aiel. Even Elaine was peering about. "Whether you would consider any of us wise is another matter," Nynaeve went on. "What do you want of us?" Avienda smiled. She was really quite lovely, Egwene realized. The grim expression had masked it. "You talk as the wise ones do. To the point, and small suffering of fools." Her smile faded, but her voice remained calm. "One of us lies gravely hurt, perhaps dying. The wise ones often heal those who would surely die without them. And I have heard Aes Sedai can do more. Will you aid her?" Egwene almost shook her head in confusion. A friend of hers is dying? She sounds as if she's asking if we'll lend her a cup of barley flour. "I will help if I can," Nynaeve said slowly. "I cannot make promises, Avienda. She may die despite anything I do." "Death comes for us all," the Aiel said. "We can only choose how to face it when it comes. I will take you to her."
And there's this often repeated notion among most of our characters that the Aiel don't really have a lot of expression to their faces. That they tend to be much more subtle in how they form their expressions. But they're still there. And we see that over time, our main characters are able to read the Aiel better and better and better and actually understand what they're feeling. It's not that they don't have the feelings, it's that they have less expression around that feeling.
Right. On their face, which is kind of a cultural difference where I think it's sort of considered egregious to have an outburst or childlike in their culture.
Similar with the lack of public affection. Like, you can't hold hands in public.
You can walk around naked, but if you kiss your girlfriend out on the street, it's like, ooh.
Scandalous. Scandalous.
Two women in Aiel garb stood up no more than 10 paces away. One, out of a little fold in the ground that Egwene would not have supposed could hide a dog, and the other in grass that reached only halfway to her knees. They lowered their black veils as they stood. That gave her another jolt, just seeing the veils.
Right, it's kind of a threat.
Right, because even Egwene knows what that means, although she is even more ignorant than, Elaine seems to know the most.
I mean, why do you think they were veiled? They would not harm an Aes Sedai.
I think because they don't know.
Yeah.
And also, they just left a fight. So they may have never unveiled. When Dylan got stabbed in the stomach, and if she's still alive, we can assume that it hasn't been long.
No, they did transport her to the river, though. So the battle happened, she was dying, she said, "I want to die, see water," and so they picked her up and carried her to the river.
That's true. And, I don't know this, but I assume that they crept up veiled, not necessarily knowing what the situation was. And then once Avienda, who did not appear veiled, Avienda for some reason was the one who approached them, the other two just lay there waiting to make sure everything went well. If Nynaeve had suddenly tried to kill them, Bane and Chiad would have popped out of a bush and started stabbing.
Right. That makes sense.
I like that Suffet. If you don't know if the snake is poisonous, you treat it like it is. This next part I had highlighted is also relevant to that question. And Egwene observes, the woman with fiery hair handed Aviendha weapons, a long, heavy-bladed knife, and the list goes on to list all the typical Aiel weapons. But so Aviendha put her veil down and she left her weapons behind to approach these women for whatever reason. Probably because she assumed that they were women like the Wise Ones, so it would be, offensive to approach them armed.
Oh, and so basically she's trying to approach as a non-threatening figure.
Right.
So she pops up unarmed, unthreatening, hoping to have a dialogue with her two friends in the bushes, ready to kill if something goes wrong.
That's what I assume.
Yeah. I like the introductions.
Yeah, we were talking about this a bit in the last episode, I think, or maybe the one before that, but the three women, well, two actually, it just looks like Elaine and Egwene introduce themselves in turn, but they kind of try to make up titles for themselves. Elaine, of course, has a title, but Egwene doesn't.
No, but she gives her, family and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll have this, formal way of introducing themselves.
And Elaine knows the right way. She knows the form of the introduction. That's something that's been taught to her. She doesn't copy anybody. She actually starts the introductions.
Aviendha introduces herself, and then Elaine introduces herself, then Bane, then Chiad, then Egwene. And they assume also that Egwene and Elaine are first sisters, and that leads into a conversation of what that is.
Mm-hmm. And it's the idea that first sisters are, siblings, first of all. You have the same parents or mother. Right. It's not based on father, based on mother only. But as we see later in the ceremony that bonds the three women together, you can actually have this sort of second birth, and it's remarkably similar to an actual birth, and there is an actual mother in that ceremony that becomes the shared mother of the two sisters. So that's how you're able to become sisters, is you're actually adopted by a woman.
Yeah. And so they try to explain that to Egwene and Elaine, but they don't really seem to understand.
And there's a power bonding that goes on there.
Oh, yeah.
Very similar to the Warder bond.
Similar but different in some ways.
Yes.
Similar in that I think they know where the other is. They can... The emotional bond,
right,
where they can sense each other's feelings is there. Although, maybe it is the Warder bond and it just doesn't involve a channeler.
Possibly. I think it's similar. I don't think it's exactly the same, but I think it comes out of a similar tradition.
But for sake of clarity, can anyone think of two wise ones that are first sisters? I'm just wondering because... If a woman bonds another woman, we know that there's this kind of significant benefits. If at least one is a channeler, I'm just wondering if it is the Warder bond just done on two non-channelers. You know what I mean? So it wouldn't have the same benefits, but similar. Curious. Oh, thank you, Aradia. Saying it isn't the Warder bond. Elaine does some OP engineering later, one power engineering later, that blends both the weaves.
Right, yeah, I think they're just similar. It's a bond, but it's not the same. Oh, so the triple bonding is like a weird combination of both? That's right. Because Min isn't a channeler and wouldn't normally
be able to do that.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff around bondings. I mean, bonding and compulsion, which are all kind of related, and then you have this other... Our first brothers bonded with the one power in the same way. I would think so. I
would imagine so as well, but I don't know that we have any examples of that to confirm it. I can't think of any.
But then again, there's a lot of ceremonies that women go through that men don't.
Right.
And first sisters might be one of those. Do we ever see first brothers? Do they even exist? Is that something that happens? Or is it just, beyond obviously being related, having the same actual mother? Yeah, I guess yes. Obviously there would be first brothers in terms of born to the same person, but do they can you create them?
Travis says when Aviendha and Elaine do their bonding, the wise ones say something along the lines of, few women do this and much fewer men, which implies that it has happened, at least.
Okay. But very rarely, because I think the commitment to do so is they sort of talk about how One of the themes of the book is definitely that women work better together and men work better alone. Men tend to go off and be one. They can't bond with each other without women.
Yeah.
They can't form a circle, I guess, is what I mean.
True.
Not bond. So there's an awful lot of a sense of isolation with the men and a sense of community with the women. And it sort of allows them to compete, that you have this like group of women that can compete with a singular man.
Yeah.
But the men can only get so powerful, and then they're limited.
So there's an explanation about that, and a lot of different short explanations from the Spear Maidens about who they are, how it works. Elaine and Egwene are trying to have a conversation with them and just constantly misunderstand what they're talking about.
Yeah, this is your crash course in Aiel Culture 101, which is...
So we talked about how Bane and Chiad aren't related, but they are first sisters, and then Egwene's like, well, how's that possible? Like, you either are or you aren't. They're like, well...
I didn't notice this before. Bane and Chiad are not only first sisters, they're also married.
Married? I didn't know that was explicit. I had always assumed that they were together. But
the Maidens do not, Bane went on, the Maidens do not dance the spears with one another, even when our clans do. But the Ch38 Aiel and the Goshain Aiel have held blood feud between them for over 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So Chiad and I felt our wedding pledge was not enough. So they had a wedding pledge, and that wasn't enough. So we went to speak the words before the wise ones of our clans.
Is she talking about a wedding pledge to the spear?
No, a wedding pledge to each other.
But I would not say we do not care for other men. Chiad nodded, with a hint of a smile.
There is some argument that they're saying their wedding vows are being wedded to the spear, and that prevents them from dancing the spears with each other because they're both maidens. I disagree with that. I think it's very much them saying they are married to each other.
And I don't see why not. They do, I see it in the Discord, they do give up the spear if they marry a man. But I don't know about a woman. I think the idea is that...
Can't get pregnant.
Right. The idea is that you can't be a warrior and raise a child at the same time.
Right.
So you have two options. You can have a kid and give it to the wise ones to raise.
Exactly.
To find an appropriate home for. Or you can unwed the spear to wed a man. Or leave and raise your child alone, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't do both. Polyamorandry.
Yeah, I mean, reading through this again, I don't know. I'm
What's Discord's weigh in on, are Bane and Chiad like together or just together?
I've always assumed that they were physically intimate.
Do they all sleep in one bed and later with their husband as well? Or...
I mean, I think they said she would not let a man come to her without the other, and I don't think that's just like in a relationship. I think that's in bed.
I think that's...
And that's also why I think that they are actually in a sexual relationship, is because they would not let someone else come to their bed without the other person being there.
Right, their bed.
Their bed.
Yes.
Yeah. Polyamory has rules, and you get to make those up, and that's the rules that they've made up.
It seems to be a good system, except for poor Ruark, who we find out in a minute, his wives are first sisters, and they're both like really powerful women in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Laments a little about getting bullied, more or less, into leaving the waste.
Definitely.
We don't want you dying old and fat. Go do something.
I think that might be based on a dream, because we know Ruark dies.
Yeah.
Technically killed by Avienda.
Or sending him to his fate.
Gaul likes Chiad, not Bane. And I always remember that because I say Bane is Gaul's Bane, right? He would love to get with Chiad, but Bane is in the way. She's the bane of his relationship. And so that's how I remember which one he likes and which one he doesn't.
Oh, yeah, that's a good memory trick.
Because it's very hard to tell them apart. But if you just remember that Bane is Gaul's Bane, and Chiad would be the woman he actually likes. And I do want to say that, like, being first sisters doesn't automatically mean you have a physical relationship. I just think that these two are married and first sisters. I think they're both.
Yes. This, of course, makes Egwene and Elaine blush. Elaine says, I do not think there is a need for that, Chiad, when Chiad is saying, like, if you feel that you're first sisters, you should go to the wise ones and be made first sisters.
Right. Right. I did notice that Egwene's thinking, neither one of us can have him. When thinking about Rand, when she's talking about Elaine, I'm like, Elaine
Just
can have
you,
him just fine. That is not true. If you wanted him, you could have him.
Yeah.
And if he wanted you, which he doesn't really.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, they both. It's like your high school relationship that kind of expectations are that you were going to get together with this person, but like you go off to college and you change and discover new things, and you're like, yeah, it's just not good enough anymore. It's just not what I'm looking for.
Sure. They're growing up.
Yeah.
I do not think there is a need for that, Chiad. Egwene and I already guard each other's backs. How can that be? Chiad asked slowly. You are not wedded to the spear, and you are wise ones. Who would lift a hand against a wise one?
White cloaks.
Oh, like literally anyone?
Anyone who's not Aiel. Shido.
And they're having this conversation as they approach where the Aiel have gathered near the river.
And they've been attacked by Kyrianan soldiers.
Oh, is it soldiers?
Some of those fools that the oath-breaking tree killers call soldiers.
Ah.
Thought we were another handful of the bandits who infest this land. We had to kill them to convince them otherwise. Dalen took a sword to the gut, basically.
Yeah. Have you moved her since she was hurt? There is scabbing, but it has been broken. She wanted to die near water, Avienda said. She glanced once at the river, then quickly away again. Egwene thought she might have shivered, too. Nynaeve flips out, because you don't move someone around when they've been stabbed in the stomach.
I think she's also deliberately getting angry. I think she sees someone injured, and so she's like, fools, idiots, how could you possibly, she's trying to piss herself off. She's trying to see the stupidity in what's going on in order to get her channeling going so she can actually heal this person. She's already trying to she's already learned how to wind herself up.
Yeah.
And she's already doing it as soon as she comes near this woman. It takes her a few seconds and some herbs, but she's angry as hell.
Just because you carry weapons like men doesn't mean you have to think like them. She pulled a deep wooden cup out of the bag and pushed it at Chiad. Fill that. I need water to mix these so she can drink them. Chiad and Bane stepped to the river's edge and returned together. Their faces never changed, but Egwene thought they had almost expected the river to reach up and grab them.
Male stupidity. Always a source of female anger.
If we had not brought her here to the river, Aes Sedai, Avienda said, we would never have found you, and she would have died anyway. Nynaeve snorted. The wise ones use herbs, Aes Sedai, skipping a little.
Mm-hmm.
But I had not heard that Aes Sedai use them. I use what I use. Nynaeve snapped and went back to sorting through her powders and whispering to herself. She truly does sound like a wise one, Chiad told Bane softly. The other woman gave a tight nod.
So I honestly think as she's putting this herb concoction together, she's actually forming the weave for healing. And she uses basically analogies like, I need a little bit of this root, which means she needs a little bit of fire. And a little bit of this root, which is a little bit of water. And she's like actually sort of assembling the weave in her head for healing.
Yeah. By
assembling the herbs.
I think of it kind of like how Moraine has that staff for a little while and she says like, no, this is not really anything. It's like a focus. It's like a distraction almost to...
Exactly. It gives her mind permission to do the healing.
Right.
Because she's not using the power to do the healing. She's using the herbs,
Moraine
in
can
quotes, to
point a stick at someone and say bang, and then they explode, you know? This is not the stick that's doing something, but her mind is able to construct this narrative that then allows her to channel while thinking less about it.
It becomes part of like muscle memory and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it's almost the first of her two blocks.
The herbs.
Because she sort of has this block with healing where she can only do it with herbs. And that only gets broken in the next chapter.
That's true.
And then from then on, she can heal without them. But this is definitely almost a mini block that she has to break.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't think there's any chance that the herbs ever actually do anything. She's like, here, drink these, and you're healed. Like, herbs are just sitting in your stomach for like half an hour.
Yeah, would take a long time. There's a short aside here that I kind of wanted to go over. We've talked maybe a little bit about it already, or it came up in their conversations, but do not be offended, she said carefully, but I notice you all are uneasy about the river. It does not grow violent unless there is a storm. You could swim in it if you wanted, though the current is strong away from the banks. Elaine shook her head. The Aiel looked blank. Avienda said, I saw a man, a Shinaran, do this swimming once.
Pulled himself into the water. Yeah, I like the Stone River Sept is literally a river of stones. There's nothing else in it.
Yeah. Is it, I forget if it was in this scene, but was it, maybe it was Gaul that said this, I'm not remembering right, but he reached out and pulled himself through the water. He like describes the mechanics of swimming, but he doesn't know what the fuck it is.
Like freestyle.
Yeah.
Front crawl.
Leia's asking how often do the Shinarans clash with the Aiel. I think just during the Aiel War, the Shinarans were very active, especially being on the border. The Shinar butts right up against the waist.
Yeah, you see that Lan, in New Spring, Lan is one of the Malkier fighting the Aiel. And he's basically saying, we've seen a pattern. 1,000 years ago, the Shadow tore the land in the 100-Year War. 1,000 years before that, there was the Trolloc Wars. 1,000 years before that, the Breaking. And we're about 1,000 years after the last big event. This is clearly an act of the Shadow, and therefore the Aiel must be influenced by the Shadow. And by fighting the Aiel, I'm fulfilling my duty to fight the Shadow. But by the end of the war, Lan had convinced himself that was not true. That they were actually there for justice, not because they were influenced by the Shadow.
That is an easy mistake to make, especially based on those terms.
And so, yeah, I imagine that there was quite a bit of conflict. Even though the Shinarans and the Borderlanders were on the front of the lines during the Aiel War, I think they have more than anything respect for each other.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of like when the Aiel form up against Lan, and when they realize who's leading the battle, instead of fighting him, they salute him, call out and align, or whatever that word is. The one man alone.
I already said Ein Allen in my head. I have no idea if that's right or not.
I think there's another syllable in there.
There could very well be.
And they leave him alone.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of wiping him out. And clearly here, Ruark knows about him.
Yes. About when he sees the sigil on Nynaeve's ring. Or Lan's ring, I suppose you could say.
The ring of the Malkier kings.
Yeah.
But I like how just Egwene's kind of embarrassed. It's like, Elaine knew there's no water, and...
Yeah. Julian, surely you have swum in the Stones River that your sept is named after. Swim, Julian said awkwardly. It means to get in the water? All of the water? With nothing to hold on to. She shuddered. I said before I crossed the dragon wall, I had never seen flowing water I could not step across. The Stones River. Some claim it had water in it once, but that is only boasting. There are only the stones. You already talked about that, but...
Yeah, I do imagine it used to be 3,000 years ago before the breaking. It probably was a river and has a bunch of...
That makes sense.
River stones at the bottom. Those round, worn-away, oval-shaped stones are probably... And it probably looks like a riverbed.
Yeah.
But there's no water in it.
No.
And then, they get so nervous that... Because she makes them nervous... that Egwene feels threatened and opens herself to Saidar. Mm-hmm. And Avienda's immediately like, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Because Avienda is a channeler and senses the other woman embracing the source and may be able to see the weaves of air she weaves to possibly seize the other women.
Right.
And she's like, whoa, it's okay.
Easy.
Easy there, settle down.
Of course, Elaine said. So long as we do not attack you with weapons, you will not try to harm us. All four Aiel look shocked, and then they explain, no, even if you did attack us with weapons, we still wouldn't do anything.
No, there's definitely that shame of having failed the Aiel. Sorry, of having shamed the Aes Sedai.
Yeah. They're applying the same rules that are applied to wise ones to these women. They're like equating them, These are like the same thing, kind of. But Aes Sedai are possibly even more dangerous, which... it turns out isn't really true.
But it's also a remnant of the Way of the Leaf, that you can, slap one of the Daishine and they would just turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
And would never react. And that's similar to how they treat the wise ones, that if a wise one were to slap an Aiel, the Aiel would turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the Way of the Leaf has echoed down through the generations and split into what the Tinkers do and what the Aiel do. and how the Aiel interpret it in a very different way, but it still affects a lot of their day-to-day life and honor.
Yeah.
Oh, I just re-listened to the Red Column Terran scene with Rand.
Oh, man.
So many good stuff. So much good stuff in there. I honestly, we're going to do an episode on every single flashback.
We probably could.
It's going to be, that chapter, I think it might be 2 or 3 chapters, but that's going to be a lot of talking.
Should we just release like a 4-hour block episode of like Ruidian?
It's like the last battle. The last battle chapter as well is going to be.
Oh, yeah. Well, the last battle's like a couple 100 pages long, isn't it?
It's like a book.
Its own short book.
I notice how Avienda's telling her this, no story tells us the truth, although the wise ones of the clan chiefs might know. And it's like, of course they know. They go through the stone columns, and they're able to face the truth of what the Aiel are.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the numbers of survival were so low. Only 1 in 3 people who go through the stone columns, or men who go through the stone columns, survive. It's higher with women, because women are tougher.
We see that Rand goes through at the same time as a man who wants to see if he can become a clan chief, and he, I think, tears his own eyes out.
Yeah,
is that right?
He literally tears his own eyes out and his face off, and never comes out the other side. He cannot handle the truth of what his people are.
Couladin's brother, is that right?
Yep.
Thank you, Sokhan.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons Couladin really hates Rand, because his brother and Rand pretty much, Rand went in a day after.
Oh, that's right. Didn't Couladin imply that, you killed my brother?
Yeah, basically. Why else would he not have come back and you would have?
Yeah.
It's an inherent xenophobia, racism thing.
Sure. Also, this isn't that big of a deal to Rand.
Right, no, and that's why he
it's awesome and everything, but
yeah.
it's not like a soul-crushing...
It doesn't impact his culture in the same way. He's not part of the Aiel culture, and even though he's got the Aiel blood.
Right.
And that's why it doesn't bother him at all.
It's mind-blowing to find out these things about himself, but it doesn't shake his worldview.
His worldview's already so shaken.
Right.
This is oh yeah, okay, that's cool. I think his biggest thing is did I really see the boring of the hole? And it's yeah, you did.
It's Nynaeve healing the women, and
yeah.
I was going to read a few lines of her grumbling and yelling first.
She's working herself into a temper. And I also wanted to talk about the Balefire line.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was the only... I had that highlighted, but I basically... Is it Bane and Chiad said, well, we don't know much about Aes Sedai, but... Is it Avienda?
Yeah.
We do know that if we anger them again, they might destroy us all with their Balefire.
We must never fight Aes Sedai. If you bring your lightnings and balefire against me, I will dance with them, but I will not harm you. So sort of in that same way that, saying I'm not going to harm you, if you bring your lightnings and balefire, as, the worst weapons she can possibly think of, that the
I'll fight your lightning,
have.
But I won't fight you.
Right. And then Egwene says, Avienda, what's balefire? And so we're starting to work up to balefire as this thing. Mm-hmm. And we actually see some balefire in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting.
Super cool fight scene.
Because it really this is the first book where balefire is mentioned, and we get a couple of mentions of it and then we see it, but we don't make the connection with what happens with what balefire is until later.
Right. I also kind of want to point out that I think this is fresh on Egwene's mind because she just went through her testing, and in her testing she noticed that she knew what balefire was, but when she came back out she didn't anymore. She was just knew what the concept was, and now she's hearing about it, so she's asking.
What's that phenomenon where once you learn a word you start hearing it everywhere?
Yes.
Similar that
I think there's a word for it, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I know there is.
And when Egwene sees it, I noticed in the next chapter, she knows what it is. She knows that it is balefire.
Right.
Which I saw as another thinned veil thing.
Sure.
She has no right to know what that is. But as soon as she sees it, she knows it for what it is.
Interesting.
But we'll get there. Right. Next episode.
And talk about how Nynaeve knew to make balefire.
Uh-huh. Same thing, I suspect. Stabbing people, Nynaeve growled. Stabbing women! Avienda shifted her feet and frowned again, and she was not alone among the Aiel. I'm imagining these brave warriors, staring at their feet and hunching over.
Yeah.
Oh God, she's going to kill us all. And they talk about the balefire for a second.
Sort of looking at each other sideways like, what's going on? This is weird.
No right, Nynaeve snapped. No one has the right to tear bodies, so it is not right. Is she angry? Avienda asked uneasily. Chiata and Bane and Julian exchanged worried looks. It is all right, Elaine said. It is better than all right, Egwene added. She is getting angry, and it is much better than all right. The glow of Saidar surrounded Nynaeve suddenly. Egwene leaned forward, trying to see, and so did Elaine, and Dylan started up with a scream, eyes wide open. In an instant, Nynaeve was easing her back down, and the glow faded. Dylan's eyes slid shut, and she lay there panting. I saw it, Egwene thought. I think I did. She was not sure she had been able to make out all the many flows, much less the way Nynaeve had woven them together. What Nynaeve had done in those few seconds had seemed like weaving 4 carpets at once while blindfolded. Nynaeve used the bloody bandages to wipe Dylan's stomach, smearing away bright red new blood and black crusts of dried old. There was no wound, no scar, only healthy skin, considerably paler than Dylan's face. With a grimace, Nynaeve took the bloody cloths, stood up, and threw them into the river. Wash the rest of that off her, she said, and put some clothes back on her. She's cold, and be ready to feed her. She will be hungry. She knelt by the water to wash her hands.
I assume all the new skin is totally untanned whenever you get healed.
That's what I figure. It's just freshly made skin, so it hasn't seen the sun yet, so she's as pale as a ginger.
Right. And I don't imagine the Aiel get a lot of sun on their stomach anyway.
Probably not. I feel like this is totally headcanon, but I feel like the Aiel probably have like really hardcore farmer's tans, essentially. Because they go around covered in the way that real-life cultures do that live in deserty places now, which is to say that, you know, maybe your hands
and face,
a little bit
of face are really the only thing that are exposed.
Yeah.
Everything
and the rest
else
is covered
up with the loose cloth to protect you from the sun.
This kind of loose, flowy cotton, algode, they call it, which is a name for cotton in some real world language. I looked this up a long time ago, but I think
the Aiel greeting of I see you is also a translation of a real world cultural greeting. Algode is Spanish, by the way.
Gotcha.
And
Thank
the
you.
ICU is a Zulu greeting.
Oh, nice.
It kind of reminds me of Ursula Le Guin, where wishing someone a good morning can have dire consequences, so you just wish someone a morning.
Have your morning.
Right. The Aiel don't say, good to see you. They say, I see you.
Yeah.
There's no qualification
also
to the fact that I see you.
I'm sure the Chosen that are here with us now have already done this, but if you're out there and you're audio only and you never made the connection, just Google Zulu spear. That is an Aiel spear. There's one that was hanging on the wall of Robert Jordan's study. Who knows if it's still there? But you can see it. It's real obvious once you see it.
The Asenji is what it looks like.
Which is, you know, compared to, obviously there are many different kinds, but many European style spears, these have a much longer blade.
And a much shorter haft.
It can almost be used like a sword, right?
And that's something else we see in Rand's flashback, is the origin of that shorter spear for the Aiel.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's when the first maiden takes up the spear and she goes to fight with it, and the long haft gets caught in her skirts. So the dude cuts it off, tries to train her, and he cuts it off and makes it a shorter spear so it doesn't get tangled, and then realizes, hey, with this shorter spear, I can basically use it like a sword.
Yeah.
And that's really when the Aiel become incredibly powerful fighters, is when they convert to a short spear and a buckler.
And I've seen like carved wood blocks and things where warriors sometimes hold the short spear with that long blade point forward in a throwing, stabbing motion, and other times they're holding it point facing behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Which
is more of a sword stance.
Right, you can whip that thing and cut somebody's arm off. If you know, same as you would a sword, it's just a smaller piece of steel. It's a bit ironic because the point is supposed to be that it's not a sword, but of course
the difference between a short spear and with a long blade and the sword, it's like the length of the haft is a little bit longer than it would be
Right.
on the sword, but like the overall length is probably the same. The overall weight is probably similar. Maybe the spear is lighter,
Yeah.
faster.
If you cut that wooden bit a little more, it would just be a very short sword.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, just different enough that it's not a sword.
Well, I've been meaning to send out to some emails to various people, but I wanted to just maybe put an open call out on the podcast that if you would like to create content, are currently creating content that you feel like is similar to what we're doing or might be interesting to our listeners on What Spoilers. Seth and I have talked a lot about kind of incorporating and cross-promoting other related podcasts. We've been doing a little bit of that casually over the last year, and I just kind of wanted to throw it out there. Do you have a podcast about the Dune Saga or something?
Yeah, let's produce it. We've got an umbrella.
Yeah.
Come, sit under our umbrella.
Or cross-promote, or
Yeah.
feel free to reach out. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to some people over the next coming weeks. Your YouTube channel, whatever.
I like that idea.
I have a couple things in mind.
As long as I don't have to edit it all.
Oh, right. Yeah, no. The idea would be to eventually create a loose amalgam of fantasy and science fiction related podcasts.
I would think as part of that, we could provide some technical help in terms of how to accomplish your goal.
Yeah, totally. Find ways that we can mutually benefit.
Right.
There are a lot of, especially, much more successful and famous podcasts that I listen to that have been doing this over the last couple of years where they kind of help each other out. I listen to all the Radiotopia podcasts. They're all awesome, which is a good example of that's like a dozen podcasts, dozen different producers or whatever.
I enjoy Earwolf as well. Does a lot of good podcasts.
Earwolf?
Earwolf.
I don't know if I know that one. There's a couple of big ones out there. Crooked Media.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a bunch. And what we're doing wouldn't fit into what Crooked Media is doing or what Radiotopia is doing, but maybe there are podcasts that fit in with what we're doing.
Sure.
Well, there definitely are.
Deep analysis of individuals, rather than pass by surface level reviews, getting deep into content is something that I feel like is hard to find, and really obsessing over one thing. And people do it with TV shows, but not so much with books. And I think I like that as a sort of a content category that we can really dominate.
Yeah. And this book club-esque thing that we're doing has turned out to be moderately popular.
Aradia's thinking about doing Pern. That would be fun. Anne McCaffrey.
Yeah. I do it, Aradia.
Aradia pretty much has carte blanche permission to do whatever she wants.
We also release episodes almost every other day. About every other day.
Almost, yeah.
Especially if you include Mistborn as well.
Definitely.
That's 3 or 4 a week, so.
And the occasional just roll with it.
If you're subscribed to both, that's like an hour of content every other day. Ish.
It's not bad for a couple of amateurs. And as well as, again, let me give this opportunity to send out a thank you to John Horrell again. I know I haven't mentioned this in a while, but he contributes to the podcast in ways big and small, constantly helping us out, occasional suggestions. He is a vital part of what we do here.
You don't see him or hear from him?
Not often. He's occasionally in the Discord. And I also want to say thank you to Ken for helping us out with the Mistborn Spoilers podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Have we thanked him out loud before? Because we should have.
We probably should do it on that podcast.
Well, we are now. Yeah, we should. But still. Thank you, Ken.
They both make this possible because we'd be down to 1 or 2 episodes a week max if we didn't have help with the editing. No, we don't have AC today. It's hot outside.
We do record in a basement, so
that is helpful.
It's like 15 degrees quieter, 15 degrees colder down here.
Timber's just being a whiny butt today.
Timber, what are you upset about?
What's going on? I think he got some chicken, and now he just he can smell it, and he totally wants more. Let me go put it away and see if that'll help.
No, I hear the other neighborhood dogs barking. Yeah, it's been really, really hot. Discord is talking about how hot it's been in the Pacific Northwest. I rode my bike today from Julia's place to mine, and luckily it was totally my intent from the beginning to stop at a cafe about halfway through and sit in the air conditioning, and I had some social media stuff to catch up on and a couple other projects, and so I got to stop halfway through, but especially the last stretch is down a large avenue that I head north on, and it's just not shaded, and you're just out there in the direct sunlight, and it's 95 degrees or whatever. I was just dripping by the time I got here. I just immediately took a shower.
I haven't actually checked to see what the temperature is. I guess it's 92 right now. It was 94 earlier. Yeah, that's hot. Portland's not supposed to be that hot. We're very lucky to have this basement to hang out in. Because it's probably only 80 down here?
I have no way of knowing, but I figure it's at least 15 degrees cooler. Because there's no sunlight really gets in here. I mean, there are windows, but they're tiny windows.
Well, and because we're literally in the earth is cooler.
We're 7 feet underground or something like that.
But you can walk down the stairs, and there's a significant temperature gradient.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and the really nice thing about Portland is that it still gets cool at night.
Yeah, the heat doesn't really stick, so it's 95 during the day, 65 at night, which is great.
So you can just open up the windows, throw a box fan in there, and just cool everything down. And then if you shut the windows when you get up in the morning, the house will hold on to the coolness through most of the day. Do not know what that dog is doing. I read an article, and of course I totally believe it without any additional evidence, that where you spend the first 2 years of your life has an influence on how you feel heat and cold. That your body basically gets used to that environment, and that affects how you, from then on, perceive how hot and cold things are. And as someone who spent the first 2 years of his life in Canada, I hate the heat. It's awful. I'd rather be cold any day of the week. I'm sure it's one of those sensational articles that's barely based in science, but I like it because, it gives me justification.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?